Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to a journey through time where red mountains whisper ancient secrets and hearts find their true home. Today, I will take you to a story that transcends eras. In times where appearances dictate destinies and prejudices shape lives, a story that reminds us that sometimes we need to lose ourselves to find ourselves, and that home isn't always where we're born, but where we choose to flourish. Tell me, where are you watching from? What distant or nearby lands hold your story? If this narrative touches your heart, as I hope it does, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave that loving like. Year 1881, San Rafael Territory of New Mexico. In the lands where the sun draws long shadows between dry mountains and the wind carries whispers of past eras, our story unfolds like silk slipping through careful fingers. Morning came slowly over San Rafael, painting golden, the adobe houses that spread like forgotten dreams among the arid hills. In the great house of the Cisneros family, where bougainvillea crawled along the walls like purple tears, silence carried the weight of the unspoken. Visitation watched her sisters through the foggy reflection of the window while they dressed for Sunday Mass. Exaltación, at 17, gathered her golden hair like ripe wheat, and Primitiva, 15 years of crystalline laughter, adjusted the dress that enhanced her eyes clear as spring water. Both inherited from their dead mother the beauty that the town admired, that beauty which opened doors and hearts, which transformed women into princesses from the tales that Crescencia, the governess, whispered by candlelight. She, Visitación, at 19 years old, carried within herself the mark of a difference that no one dared name, but that everyone saw. Her black hair like a moonless night contrasted with the brown skin that the desert sun had kissed with too much affection. Her deep eyes kept secrets that not even she knew, and her beauty, if it existed, was of those that don't reveal themselves at first glance, but need to be discovered like buried treasures. Visitación, Don Macedonio's voice, cut through the morning air like a cold blade. He stood in the doorway of the room, impeccable in his Sunday suit, but in his gaze was something she knew well, that expression of one who looks at a past mistake that insists on remaining visible. Yes, Father. You'll stay home today. Crescencia needs help in the kitchen. It was always like this. There was always an excuse, always a reason why she shouldn't be seen, shouldn't accompany her sisters to parties, to gatherings, to the life that happened beyond the walls of that house that was her golden prison. Exaltación and Primitiva passed by her like perfumed breezes, their dresses whispering promises of dances and courtships, of enamored glances and intertwined hands after Mass. They didn't even greet her. After all, how do you greet someone who doesn't exist? When silence returned to inhabit the house, Visitación walked to her small room at the end of the hallway. There, between bare walls and the window that faced the back patio, she kept her only treasure, a sewing machine that had belonged to her mother, and some fabric scraps that she collected like one who collects petals from rare flowers. She sat before the indigo-blue fabric that awaited her hands. It was a dress she would never wear, but that she sewed with the affection of one who embroiders dreams. Each stitch was a silent prayer, each gather a hope kept in her chest like a coal that refuses to die. While she sewed, she hummed softly a song she had learned from Crescencia, an ancient melody that spoke of women who found their destiny beyond the mountains. Her voice, sweet as wild honey, resonated through the empty walls, and for a moment, just a moment, she felt beautiful. The sound of hooves interrupted her humming. Through the window, she saw a man she didn't know conversing intensely with Don Macedonio in the patio. He was dark-skinned, dressed simply, and carried in his eyes an urgency that made her heart accelerate without apparent reason. Crescencia appeared in the doorway, her face heavy with a worry she tried to disguise. "Child, your father wants to see you in the parlor, right now." Visitación put away her sewing with trembling hands. Something in the air had changed, as it changes before a storm, when even the birds fall silent, sensing what is about to come. Upon entering the parlor, she found Don Macedonio seated in his leather armchair, his face more serious than she had ever seen. The strange man stood by the window, observing her with an intensity that made her lower her eyes. Visitación. Her father's voice sounded different. heavy with something she couldn't decipher. "This is Saturnino Herrera. He brought a proposal that will change our life." She remained silent, hands clasped in front of her body, awaiting words that her soul already sensed capable of changing everything. What proposal would this be that would make Don Macedonio look at his forgotten daughter with the eyes of one who had just found the solution to an ancient problem? The silence in the parlor was dense like humidity before rain. Saturnino Herrera removed his hat and turned it between his calloused hands, searching for the right words for a proposal that had nothing right about it. "The Apache tribes," he began, his voice hoarse like cured leather, "don't want more war, neither do we. But peace has its price." Don Macedonio nodded for him to continue, but his gaze remained fixed on Visitacion, as if he were seeing her for the first time, or perhaps for the last. "They demand proof of good faith, an alliance sealed with blood and commitment." Saturnino paused, swallowing hard. "They want a wife from the town, a woman who would symbolize the union between our peoples." The words fell into the air like stones thrown into a deep well. Visitacion felt the world move beneath her feet, as if the earth had decided to change places. "And the chosen warrior," Saturnino continued, avoiding looking directly at her, "is Ulzana. A man respected among his people. They say he never lost a battle, but also never killed unnecessarily." Don Macedonio rose slowly, like a man carrying an invisible weight on his shoulders. "How old is he?" 28. Good age for a warrior. "And," Saturnino hesitated, "they say he's a man of his word." Visitacion heard everything as if the voices came from very far away, like echoes of a conversation happening in another world. She knew, from the moment she had entered the parlor, she knew that she would be the chosen one. Not because she was loved or desired, but because she was the one who would be missed least. "I have other daughters," Don Macedonio said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. "Yes, sir, but they have suitors, commitments, and Visitacion." Saturnino didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Everyone understood what hung suspended in the air. Visitacion, the daughter no one had asked for in marriage. Visitacion, who at 19 was already considered a spinster. Visitacion, who would be perfect to be used as currency because no one would mourn her absence. What kind of man is he? The question left her lips before she could contain it. Both men looked at her with surprise, as if they had forgotten she had her own voice. "They say he's quiet, doesn't speak much, but when he speaks, his words carry weight. Lost his family in a battle many years ago. Since then, he lives. Alone, quiet like her, alone like her." "When?" asked Don Macedonio. "The ceremony will be next week, in the plaza in front of everyone. We need the town to see that we're serious about peace." 1 week, 7 days to say goodbye to the only life she had known, even though that life was made more of silences than joys. "And if I refuse?" Visitacion surprised herself with the question. Don Macedonio turned toward her with an expression that mixed disbelief and something dangerously close to anger. "Refuse? You'll save hundreds of lives, Visitacion. You'll be remembered as the woman who brought peace to our lands." "But what if I refuse?" she insisted, feeling a strange courage sprouting in her chest like a wild plant. "Then blood will be spilled, and each death will weigh on your conscience forever." Her father's words were like slaps, but also like liberation. Finally, he showed what he had always thought, that she was responsible for everyone's happiness, but never deserving of her own. "I understand," she said simply. Saturnino adjusted his hat on his head and headed for the door. "He will come for her at noon next Friday. Bring only what's necessary. They say the Apache value simplicity more than ornaments." When the men left, Visitacion remained in the empty parlor, hearing the clock mark the seconds that separated her from a destiny chosen by others. Through the window, she saw the distant mountains where the Apache lived, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel fear of the unknown. Crescencia appeared in the doorway, her eyes tearful. "Child." "It's all right, Crescencia. Maybe it's the first time in my life that someone chooses me for something. But it's to be the wife of a savage." Visitacion smiled. Sadly. And what am I here? A spinster nobody wants. At least there I'll be someone's wife. That night, while she sewed her farewell dress, Visitacion didn't know she was embroidering not an end, but a new beginning that awaited her beyond the silent mountains. The days that followed passed like leaves carried by the wind. Too fast to be retained, too slow to be forgotten. Visitacion found herself in a strange position. For the first time in her life, she was the center of the town's attention, but for reasons that made her heart contract like a flower, touched by frost. The women came to visit her with faces heavy with a compassion she didn't want. They brought fabrics, laces, small gifts, as if she were departing to the world of the dead. Perhaps for them, it was exactly that. "Poor child," they whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. "Sacrificed for the sins of all of us." But Visitacion didn't feel like a martyr. While she sewed her farewell dress, a beige fabric she had chosen especially because it reminded her of the color of earth after rain, she felt something she had never experienced: expectation. Exaltacion and Primitiva avoided her, as if misfortune were contagious. Only once on the eve of the ceremony, Primitiva approached her. "I'm afraid for you," said the younger sister, her voice tremulous as a leaf in the wind. "Why?" "They are different. Savages. What if he's cruel?" Visitacion paused in her sewing and looked at her sister, really looked perhaps for the first time. She saw in Primitiva's clear eyes a genuine fear, but also something more. The first demonstration of affection she had received from one of her sisters. "And what if he's not?" she responded gently. "What if he's just different? But you'll never come home again." Home. The word resonated strangely in Visitacion's ears. This house, where she had spent 19 years feeling like an intruder, would it really be her home? "Maybe I'm going home," she murmured, more to herself than to Primitiva. On Friday morning, Visitacion woke before dawn. The town still slept when she dressed in her carefully sewn outfit. The beige dress had discreet embroidery on the sleeves, and bodice, small flowers that she imagined to be resistant like those that grow in the desert, beautiful despite the aridity. Crescencia helped her comb her long black hair, braiding it into a single braid that fell down her back like a dark cascade. "You're beautiful, child. More beautiful than I've ever seen you." It was true. There was something different in her face that morning, a serenity she had never had, as if she had finally found peace with her reflection. When the church bell struck noon, half the town was already gathered in the central plaza. Visitacion walked among the people who parted. In her path, some with respect, others with morbid curiosity. Don Macedonio stood beside the priest, both with solemn faces of those presiding over a funeral. Then she saw him. Ulzana stood near the fountain, and he was nothing like she had imagined. Tall, with broad shoulders that spoke of strength without ostentation, black hair gathered in a simple braid. His skin was like bronze warmed by the sun, and when his eyes met hers, Visitacion felt something move in her chest, not fear, but recognition, as if their souls already knew each other from some previous life. He watched her as she approached, and in his gaze was something she had never seen directed toward herself, genuine interest. He wasn't studying her, looking for defects or qualities, but simply saw her, really saw her. The priest murmured words about alliance and peace, but Visitacion heard only the sound of her own heart. When Ulzana extended his hand, she took it without hesitation. His skin was rough from work, but his touch was gentle. He spoke then, for the first time, in slow but correct Spanish. "Do you come of your own free will?" The question surprised her. No one had ever asked her that. "I come because it's my destiny," she replied, and in saying so, she felt it was true. Ulzana nodded slightly, as if the answer satisfied him. Then, in front of everyone, he leaned down and whispered in her ear, "My true name is Stoneheart, but for you I'm just Ulzana." His words reached her like accurate arrows. He too kept secrets, also had a name the world didn't know. When they left the plaza, Visitacion didn't look back, not toward the father who had delivered her like currency, not toward the sisters who watched her depart, not toward the house, where she had grown up without ever belonging. She mounted the horse Ulzana had brought for her, a gentle mare with chestnut coat, and followed him toward the mountains she had always contemplated from her room's window. As she left San Rafael, behind, Visitacion realized she didn't feel sadness, but something unexpected, relief, as if she were finally following the path she should have always taken. While the adobe houses diminished in the distance, she didn't know she was riding not toward exile, but toward the first true home of her life. The journey through. The desert was like navigating a sea of sand and stone, where time seemed suspended between the infinite sky and the red earth. Ulzana rode ahead, guiding them along paths that only he could see, but from time to time he looked back, checking. If she was well, if she needed water or rest, Visitacion discovered. There was a language in his silence. It wasn't the absence of communication, but a different way of conversing. When he stopped to rest, he always chose a place with shade for her. When he offered water, he waited for her to drink first. When he noticed she was observing a rare flower or a colorful bird, he slowed the pace so she could contemplate. It was as if he read her needs before she even expressed them. On the first night, when they made camp in a small grotto between reddened rocks, Ulzana maintained respectful distance. He prepared a bed of thick blankets for her on the opposite side of the fire, and when she whispered a timid "thank you," he responded with an almost imperceptible gesture. "Tomorrow we'll reach the mountains," he said, stirring the flames with a branch. "It's different from where you lived." Different how? He thought for a long moment, as if searching for words in Spanish to translate feelings that only existed in Apache. Here, the earth speaks, and we listen. Visitacion pulled the blanket up to her chin and observed the stars that shone like diamonds scattered over black velvet. And what does it say? That you were waiting. The words made her shiver, but not from cold. Waiting for what? To come home. How could he know that exactly this thought had been circling her mind since they left San Rafael? How could he know her better than people who had lived with her for 19 years? On the second night, when a sudden storm surprised them, Ulzana stretched a tarp over both of them, creating an improvised shelter. While rain drummed on their heads and lightning illuminated the horizon, they remained side by side, their shoulders almost touching. "Are you afraid?" he asked quietly. "Not of the storm," she replied honestly. "Of what then?" "Of not being enough." The confession left her lips as if it had a life of its own. Ulzana turned to look at her in the darkness. In the lightning's light, his eyes seemed to contain the wisdom of generations. "My mother used to say that the most valuable people are those others can't see, like veins of gold inside rock. And you? Can you see me?" From the first moment in the plaza, Visitation's heart beat faster. No one had ever seen her. No one had ever tried. "What do you see?" "A woman who sews dreams into fabric, who sings to flowers no one notices, who has eyes deep as wells of fresh water." He paused. "A woman who was traded for peace, but who's worth more than all war." His words enveloped her like a warm shawl. For the first time in her life, someone saw her, not just looked, but really saw. On the morning of the third day, as they climbed through a steep canyon between rocks that rose like natural cathedrals, Visitacion glimpsed her first sight of the Apache village. It was smaller than she had imagined, but there was something about it that took her breath away. The leather tents were arranged like petals of a flower, following the natural shape of the valley. Fires released thin columns of smoke that dissolved in the crystalline air. Children ran among grazing horses, and women worked in the sun, their laughter echoing through the mountains. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Now it's your home too." When they descended into the valley, Visitacion felt dozens of eyes upon her. But they weren't looks of judgment or disdain as she was accustomed to receiving. They were looks of respectful curiosity from people who saw her as someone important enough for Ulzana to bring home. An older woman with graying hair interwoven with colorful beads approached them. She spoke rapidly in Apache with Ulzana, gesturing toward Visitacion. "This is Ishtan," Ulzana translated. She says your eyes are like those of our people. She asks if you're a daughter of earth or sky. Visitacion looked at Ishtan and on impulse replied, I'm a daughter of whoever welcomes me. When Ulzana translated, Ishtan smiled, a smile that transformed her entire face and extended her hands toward Visitacion. In that moment, being led toward a tent that would be her new house, Visitacion felt something she had never experienced, the sensation that she had finally arrived where she should always have been. The tent that would be her new home was simple as a whispered prayer. Leather walls filtered sunlight in golden tones, creating an atmosphere that reminded her of the interior of a shell. The floor was covered with woven grass mats, and in one corner there was a clay jug with fresh water, some folded blankets, and a small basket. It's our home, said Ulzana, watching as she explored the space with her eyes. The word resonated strangely. For 19 years, she had been an intruder in Don Macedonio's house. Now, in a matter of 3 days, she had a home that was ours. Where are you going to sleep? She asked, suddenly conscious of the reality of being a wife. Outside until you invite me in. The delicacy of the response surprised her. He could simply take what legally belonged to him, but he chose to wait. He chose to give her time. Thank you, she murmured. Ulzana nodded and headed for the exit, but stopped at the entrance. Ishtan will come visit you later. Will take care of you until you feel at home. When he left, Visitacion sat on one of the blankets and looked around. It was so different from her room in San Rafael. There was no heavy furniture, thick walls, or glass windows, but there was something here she had never felt before. Peace. She opened the small bundle she had brought and spread out her few belongings, some pieces of clothing, her mother's sewing box, some colorful threads, and a small hand mirror. Everything she owned in the world fit in a basket. Ishtan arrived at sunset, bringing with her 3 younger women and an aroma of spices that made Visitacion's stomach growl with hunger. They carried steaming bowls, dried fruits, and something that looked like bread, but of a different shape than she was accustomed to. The women sat in a circle on the mats, and although they didn't share the same language, they soon established communication made of gestures, smiles, and loose words, in Spanish that one or another knew. Ishtan pointed to herself and repeated her name until Visitacion pronounced it correctly. Then she pointed to the others. Daheste, a woman with sweet eyes who seemed her age, Juana, younger with easy laughter, and Nalnish, silent as an afternoon. Shadow. When they finished eating, Ishtan made gestures indicating Visitacion's clothing. She left the tent and returned with armfuls of fabrics in earth tones, browns, ochres, reds like sunset. For you, she said in slow Spanish, extending the fabrics. Visitacion touched the soft fibers and realized they were invitations. They wanted her to sew, to do what she knew how to do best. She took her sewing box and, under the curious gazes of the women, showed the delicate needles, the colorful threads, the small scissors that were her most precious tool. The women exchanged excited glances. Daheste said something quickly to Ishtan, who smiled and nodded. She says you have healer's hands, Ishtan translated with difficulty, hands that create beauty where there was none. That night, while the women said goodbye one by one, Daheste remained. She pointed to Visitacion's heart and then to her own, making gestures that universally meant friendship. When she was alone, Visitacion took one of the fabrics Ishtan had brought, a soft brown-like earth after rain, and began to sew by the light of a tallow candle. She didn't have a specific project in mind. Her hands simply moved, creating something that was born more from the heart than from the head. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice when Ulzana approached the tent entrance. "May I enter?" he asked quietly. She looked up, aware that her hair had escaped from the braid and fell loose over her shoulders. "Yes." He entered and sat at a respectful distance, watching her hands work. "What are you making?" "I don't know yet. Sometimes things are born on their own." Ulzana watched in silence for a long time. Then, surprisingly, he began to speak. When I was a child, my mother told me that each person is born with a gift. Some are warriors, others are healers. Some speak with horses, others with the wind. He paused. You speak with fabrics, they obey your hands. And what's your gift? I see what others can't see. That's why I knew the moment I saw you in the plaza that you weren't a sacrifice. You were a gift. His words made her hands stop sewing. She looked directly into his eyes for the first time since arriving. A gift for whom? For our village. For our people. He hesitated. For me. Visitacion's heart beat faster. Ulzana, you don't need to answer now. Just know that you're welcome here. Not by obligation or treaty. By choice. My choice. He rose to leave, but she called his name. Ulzana? Yes? Thank you for choosing me. That night, sleeping alone in the tent that was now her home, Visitacion dreamed of fabrics that transformed into wings and woke with the strange sensation that she had finally learned to fly. The weeks flowed like running water, each day bringing small discoveries that accumulated like beads on a precious necklace. Visitacion had learned some words in Apache, enough to greet the women and thank them for their kindnesses. They, in turn, had adopted words in Spanish, creating a hybrid language that was born from the heart more than from grammar. Her hands stayed busy from sunrise to sunset. She sewed clothes for the children, mended tents, embroidered blankets that soon became coveted for their beauty. But it was when she sang softly while working that she truly captivated her new neighbors. Her sweet voice attracted children like flowers attract butterflies, and soon they sat in circles around her, asking for the songs she had learned from Crescencia. Ulzana came to visit her every night, always respectful, always asking permission to enter. They talked about small things, the day's work, the changing seasons, the stars that told ancient stories. He brought her simple gifts, a rare flower he found in the mountains, a smooth stone from the river, once a small injured bird that she cared for until it could fly again. But there was something restless growing inside her, like a seed pressing against the earth, seeking light. It was gratitude, yes, but also a strange sensation of living someone else's life, as if she had put on clothes that weren't hers, and everyone pretended they fit perfectly. One morning, when the sun was still just a promise on the horizon, Visitacion woke with her heart racing. She had dreamed of San Rafael, of Exaltacion and Primitiva laughing in the garden, of Crescencia preparing morning chocolate. She dreamed she was back in her room, sewing at her mother's machine, hearing the familiar sounds of the life she knew. She rose silently and left the tent. The village slept under a blanket of stars that were beginning to fade. Her bare feet found a path that climbed the mountain, and without thinking much she began to walk. The escape wasn't planned, it was instinctive, like the movement of a bird that suddenly realizes the cage is open. She climbed and climbed, guided only by the waning moon and by an impulse she couldn't name. The air grew colder as she gained height, and she pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. When the sun was born, Visitacion was lost in a labyrinth of red rocks that all looked the same. Panic came slowly, like water that leaks and gradually floods. She tried to return by the path she thought she had taken, but every stone seemed to mock her ignorance. It was while trying to descend a steep slope that she stumbled. Her foot got stuck between two rocks and she fell heavily, hitting her head on a sharp edge. The pain was like a white flash, and then everything went dark. She woke to the sound of her own voice screaming for help, but the word came out in Apache. Shaye! How had she learned that word? When? Ulzana was kneeling beside her, his face heavy with worry he tried to disguise. There was blood on her head, and when she tried to move, everything spun like an out-of-control top. Don't move, he said gently. You hit your head hard. How did you find me? Your footsteps are different from ours. You walk like someone accustomed to smooth ground, not stones. He wet a cloth in fresh water and carefully cleaned the blood from her forehead. Why did you run away? The question reached her like an accurate arrow. Why had she run away? What did she hope to find lost in the mountains? I don't know, she whispered. I dreamed of home and woke up confused. And where is home for you? She tried to answer, but the words got tangled. San Rafael, the Apache village? Or was home just a feeling she hadn't yet learned to recognize? Ulzana carried her back to the village in his arms, and she was surprised by his gentle strength, by the care with which he avoided every stone that could cause her discomfort. She rested her head on his shoulder, and for the first time allowed herself to feel what it would be like to be truly cared for. During the days that followed, while she recovered from the wound, Ulzana didn't leave her alone. He prepared soups that smelled of mountain herbs, changed the bandages on her head with delicate hands, told her stories of his childhood in Apache, patiently translating when she didn't understand. One night, when the pain in her head had finally subsided, she watched him mending a leather sandal by the fire's light. "Why are you being so gentle with me?" He paused in his work and looked at her with those eyes that seemed to contain the world's wisdom. "Because you're not here by your own choice, and a heart that doesn't choose to be cared for needs double care. And if I never choose to stay, then I'll accompany you wherever you want to go and ensure you arrive safely." His answer left her speechless. No man she had known had ever spoken of love as surrender, as sacrifice offered without expecting return. That night, when he rose to sleep outside the tent as he always did, she held his hand. "Stay," she whispered. He sat again, but maintained respectful distance. "Ulzana?" "Yes?" "I think I'm beginning to understand what home is." In the soft darkness of the tent, with the sound of wind whispering in the mountains, Visitación felt something open in her chest, as if her heart were finally learning to pronounce its own name. There was a gift waiting for her when she woke the next morning. It wasn't wrapped in paper or adorned with ribbons, but simply rested on the basket where she kept her fabrics, a small sculpture of light wood, carved with patient hands. It was a seated woman, with long hair that seemed to move despite being made of wood. But what truly took her breath away were the figure's hands. They were positioned as if sewing, and between the tiny fingers was real thread, blue as the sky after a storm. She turned the piece delicately and found words engraved on the base. Cicad, Zanutso, and below the translation in Spanish with careful calligraphy, strong from within. Ulzana was outside the tent, preparing the fire for morning coffee. When she saw him, her heart accelerated in a way she still didn't know how to interpret. "Did you make this?" she asked, showing the sculpture. He nodded, but there was shyness in his eyes, as if he were a child offering his first creation. "I worked on it during the nights I spent out here. When you sang softly before sleeping, I carved. It's the most beautiful thing anyone has given me. It's not beautiful like the things you create. My hands are made for other work." Visitación gently touched the small figure's face and then looked at Ulzana. Really looked, as if seeing him for the first time. She saw the calloused hands that had carved that delicacy, the eyes that watched her with an intensity that made her chest tighten, the way he waited for her reaction, as if all his happiness depended on her approval. "Ulzana," she said softly, "why did you give me this?" "Because I saw how you look at your fabrics when you think no one is watching. There's love there. And I wanted you to know that someone also looks at you that way." His words were like stones thrown on the calm surface of a lake, creating waves that spread throughout her being. "How do you look at me?" He approached slowly, as if sudden movements could break the fragile moment they shared, as if you were a miracle that you're here, as if somehow all the pains of my life had been worth it to reach this moment. Visitación felt the words touch places in her heart she didn't know existed. For 19 years, she had been seen as a mistake, as a burden, as a problem to be solved. And here was this man, this warrior, who could have any woman saying she was a miracle. "Ulzana," she began, but he gently touched her lips with a finger. "You don't need to say anything now. Just know that you're loved. Not by obligation, not by treaty, by choice. Every day I choose to love you." That morning, Visitación worked with trembling hands, missing stitches she would normally get right with her eyes closed. The sculpture rested beside her constantly, reminding her of Ulzana's words. Love as daily choice. How different it was from everything she had known. Ishton arrived with other women for the community sewing that had become tradition. They immediately saw the small sculpture and made exclamations of admiration in Apache. "Did Ulzana make this?" asked Daheste in her mixed Spanish. Visitacion nodded, and the women exchanged meaningful glances. "He never—" Ishton struggled with the words. "Never gave gift to woman, not even when he was young and all wanted to marry him." "All wanted to marry him." "Of course," laughed Juana. "Best warrior, most respected. But he always said he was waiting for someone special. And do you think I'm special?" The women looked at each other and then laughed, not in mockery, but with genuine affection. "You make him smile," said Daheste. "We hadn't seen that for many years." That afternoon, while working alone, Visitacion found herself thinking about choices. All her life other people had chosen for her: where to live, what to wear, how to behave, whom to marry. But here, in this tent she now called home, someone had chosen her not for convenience or obligation, but for love. And now it was her turn to choose. When the sun began to set, painting the mountains gold and red, she put aside her sewing and left the tent. Ulzana was tending the horses, his silhouette outlined against the flaming sky. She approached slowly, her heart beating so loudly she was certain he could hear it. "Ulzana?" He turned, and in his gaze was a silent question. "I choose," she said simply. "What do you choose?" "You. This. Us." She took a deep breath. "I choose to love you too." For a moment that seemed eternal, they looked at each other in the golden light of sunset. Then slowly, as if it were the first time in their lives, they approached each other. When he touched her face with fingers trembling with emotion and she leaned into his caress, Visitacion knew she had finally found what she didn't know she was looking for, someone who saw her not as she was, but as she could be. And when their lips touched under the infinite sky of New Mexico, it was as if two lost souls had finally found their way home. The months that followed flowed like golden honey, each day sweeter than the last. Visitacion discovered there were infinite ways to love. In the coffee Ulzana prepared especially as she liked it, in the wildflowers he left discreetly near her sewing box, in the way he waited for her every night to tell each other about their day. The village, which before was just a strange place where she had been delivered as currency, had transformed into community. The women came not only for her to sew, but to converse, laugh, share the small joys and worries of daily life. Children ran toward her when they saw her, knowing there was always a sweet story or a soft song waiting on her lips. But it was on a winter morning when the air was crystalline and the mountains crowned with snow that everything changed. Ishton arrived at her tent carrying something Visitacion never expected to see again, a worn leather suitcase she immediately recognized. It belonged to her father. "Man came," said Ishton in her slow Spanish, "brought your things, said now you can have." With trembling hands, Visitacion opened the suitcase. Inside were clothes she hadn't seen for months, some books that had belonged to her mother, and at the bottom, wrapped in silk fabric, a small wooden box she had never seen before. "This was with your things," said the familiar voice of Saturnino Herrera behind her. Visitacion turned and saw him standing in the tent entrance, hat in his hands, face heavy with a strange expression. "Don Macedonio said you should have had it long ago. It belonged to your mother." The box was closed with a small golden key, tied by a delicate chain. When she opened it, her world crumbled and rebuilt simultaneously. Inside was a soft leather diary, letters yellowed by time, and a small portrait of a woman who was almost identical to her, but standing beside an Apache, man with gentle eyes. "My God," she murmured, taking the portrait with trembling fingers. She opened the diary to the first page and read the words written in delicate calligraphy she immediately recognized as her mother's. "If my daughter Visitacion ever reads this, know that your true father is not Don Macedonio Cisneros, but Apache warrior whom I loved more than my own life." The words danced before her eyes. Her father was Apache. She was Apache. Saturnino approached, observing her reaction with eyes that mixed compassion and discomfort. Don Macedonio always knew, he said quietly. That's why you were always different in his house. You're not a daughter of his blood. Visitacion continued reading, tears blurring the words. Her mother told of a forbidden love, of secret meetings in the mountains, of the pregnancy that forced her to marry quickly with Don Macedonio to hide the truth. Yer died in a battle before you were born, her mother had written, but he lives in your eyes, in your skin, in your heart, that always knew it belonged to the mountains. When Ulzana arrived at the tent, he found Visitacion sitting on the floor, the diary open in her lap, tears rolling silently down her face. What happened? He asked, kneeling beside her. She showed him the portrait with trembling hands. This man, was my real father. Ulzana took the portrait, and his eyes widened. For a long moment, he just stared at the image, as if seeing a ghost. Ju, he murmured finally. Did you know him? He was my uncle, my father's brother. His words reached her like lightning. If Ju was her father, and Ulzana's uncle, that means we're... She began, horror growing in her chest. Cousins, Ulzana finished, but his voice was strangely calm. Visitacion rose abruptly, panic taking hold of her. We can't, this is... Ulzana also rose and held her by the shoulders, forcing her to look into his eyes. Listen to me, he said firmly. Ja was my father's brother, yes, but not by blood. He was a brother by choice, by heart. They were raised together, fought together, but didn't share parents. Are you sure? I am. My father told me the story many times. Ju was found as a child, orphaned, and our family adopted him. He was Apache by choice, not by birth. The relief Visitacion felt was so intense her legs trembled. Ulzana held, her tightly whispering calming words in Apache. So we, she began, are not blood relatives. We're just two hearts that found each other as they should have. That night, sitting side by side under the stars, Ulzana told her everything he knew about Ju. How he was respected for his wisdom, how he had always tried to seek peace before war, how he had died protecting women and children in a battle that didn't need to have happened. You have his eyes, said Ulzana, gently touching her face. And his heart, too. He always said that true strength comes from within, like in the sculpture you made for me. Yes, Sikaj Nutso, strong from within, like your father was, like you are. Visitacion looked toward the mountains she now knew were truly her inheritance, her rightful home, not just by circumstance. Ulzana, she said softly, I want an Apache name. I want to belong completely to this place. He smiled, and there was pride in his eyes. Then we'll ask the shaman to perform the naming ceremony. While the crescent moon shone over them, Visitacion felt she was finally ready to stop being the rejected daughter of Don Macedonio and become who she should always have been, daughter of the red earth and eternal fire of the mountains. The naming ceremony was scheduled for the full moon of spring, when the earth awakens from its winter sleep and everything is reborn. During the weeks leading up to the ritual, Visitacion felt like a butterfly, still in its cocoon, knowing that something fundamental was about to transform. Ishtan and the other women prepared her with meticulous care. They taught her the songs she should sing, the movements she should make, the deep meaning of each gesture in the ancestral ritual. It's not just changing name, explained Daheste. It's dying to one life and being born to another. It's leaving old soul and receiving new soul. The preparation included fasting for 3 days, baths in spring water perfumed with sacred herbs, and silent meditation in the mountains where she should hear the spirits whisper her true name. On the morning of the 3rd day, when the sun painted the rocks golden pink, Visitacion climbed alone to a sacred cliff where generations of Apache had sought visions. She sat on a smooth stone, closed her eyes, and waited. The wind whispered through the pines with an ancient voice. Birds sang melodies that seemed to carry messages from other worlds. And slowly, like dawn that comes slowly, she heard. They weren't words in the common sense, but something deeper, a knowledge that settled in her heart like a seed finding fertile ground. When she came down from the mountain at sunset, her eyes shone with a light that hadn't existed before. The ceremony began when the moon was high, large and silver, as a disk of polished metal. The entire village gathered in a circle around a fire that crackled, sending sparks toward the starry sky. Naiche, the tribe's shaman, was an ancient man whose age no one knew for certain. His skin was like leather cured by the seasons, and his eyes held the wisdom of one who had conversed with spirits for decades. Visitation sat in the center of the circle, wearing a simple white tunic that the women had sewn especially for the occasion. Around her, arranged with ritual care, were sacred objects: river stones, eagle feathers, aromatic herbs that burned in small clay bowls. Naiche raised his hands toward the sky and began to sing in a voice that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. The words in Apache flowed like mountain water, carrying stories of creation, of transformation, of souls that find their true place in the world. Ulzana sat among the men, but his eyes didn't leave her for a moment. There was pride in his gaze, but also something more, as if he were watching a ceremony he had always known would happen, as if his entire life had been preparation for this moment. The shaman approached Visitacion with a bowl of sacred water and touched her forehead, heart and hands, murmuring blessings in Apache. Then he took a handful of red earth from the mountain and traced symbols on her cheeks, lines that represented her new lineage, her connection to earth and sky. "Speak," said Naiche in Spanish. "What name did the spirits whisper?" Visitacion rose, feeling the strength of generations of Apache women running in her veins. When she spoke, her voice was clear as a silver bell. "Zia," the spirit said, "Zia." A murmur of approval ran through the circle. Naiche smiled, the first smile anyone remembered seeing on his austere face. "Zia," he repeated, and his voice gave the name a power that made the air vibrate. She who shines, she who brings light where there is darkness. The women rose and began to sing, their voices intertwining in a harmony that seemed to make the very stars dance. One by one they approached Zia and offered her symbolic gifts. Ishtan brought a necklace of red beads made from sacred mountain stones. Daheste offered a bracelet braided with threads from her own hair. Juana gave her turquoise earrings that had belonged to her grandmother. But it was Naiche who brought the most significant gift, a staff of carved wood with symbols that told the story of women who had overcome great trials to find their place in the world. "This belonged to my grandmother, and to her grandmother before her," said the shaman. "It's given only to those who are born twice, once from the mother's womb, once from the earth's womb." Zia took the staff with trembling hands, feeling the weight of history and responsibility it carried. When the ceremony came to an end, and the last song dissolved in the night air, Ulzana approached her. In his eyes was something she had never seen before. It wasn't just love, but reverence. "Zia," he said, and the name sounded completely natural on his lips, as if it had always been her name. "It sounds right, doesn't it? It sounds like you've finally come home." They walked hand in hand to their tent. No, to their tent, because that night, for the first time, she invited him to stay, not out of gratitude or obligation, but out of love and her own choice. Lying side by side under the thick blankets, listening to the wind whisper lullabies in the mountains, Zia touched the necklace of red beads that now adorned her neck. "Do you know what's strangest?" she murmured. "What?" "Visitacion always felt like a borrowed name, but Zia seems to have been waiting for me all my life." Ulzana gently kissed her forehead and whispered, "Maybe because it always had been. Maybe we just needed to find the way to her." And for the first time in her life, the woman who was now Zia fell asleep knowing exactly who she was. 5 years had passed since the naming ceremony, and Zia flourished like a garden after rain. She was no longer the timid young woman who had arrived at the village as currency, but a respected woman whom people sought when they needed advice, when they wanted clothes made with love, or simply when they wished to hear a sweet voice singing the old songs. Ulzana had built for her a house of stone and wood on top of a hill, from where she could see the entire village and the mountains that extended to the horizon. It wasn't large, but every stone had been chosen with care, every beam cut with precision, every detail thought to bring her happiness. The house had 3 rooms, one for sleeping, one for sewing, and one for receiving visitors. But the heart of the house was the terrace that faced west, where they sat every afternoon to watch the sun paint the sky gold and red. It was on this terrace that Zije told Ulzana about the baby growing in her womb. "It will be born in autumn," she said, gently touching her still small belly, "when the leaves turn golden and the earth prepares for rest." Ulzana looked at her with eyes that shone like stars, then knelt before her and gently kissed her belly. "Our child will know these mountains as we know them," he murmured against her skin. "They will know they're loved before they even know their own name." During the pregnancy, the village women surrounded Zije with care that moved her. Ishton brought special teas made with herbs that strengthened mother and baby. Daheste sewed small clothes with threads so soft they seemed made of clouds. Juana sang lullabies that her own mother had sung to her. But it was Naiche, the old shaman, who brought the biggest surprise. "The baby will be a girl," he announced one afternoon, after studying the stars and observing signs that only he could interpret. "And she will be special, very special." "Special how?" asked Zia. "She will be born with the gift of uniting different worlds, like her mother." The girl was born on an October night when the moon was round and bright. Zaya labored for hours that seemed eternal, with Ulzana holding her hand and whispering words of encouragement. When the baby's first cry echoed through the house, everyone knew something extraordinary had happened. The girl had the golden skin of both parents, black hair that shone like silk, and eyes that seemed to contain the wisdom of past ages. But most surprising was her expression. From the first moment, she seemed to be observing the world with infinite curiosity, as if she already understood she had been born for great things. "What shall we call her?" asked Ulzana, holding his daughter with hands trembling with emotion. Zije looked at the child sleeping peacefully in her arms and knew immediately. "Daheste, like our friend, but also because it means she who brings hope." Daheste grew like a wildflower, free, strong, curious about everything around her. At 3 years old, she already spoke Apache and Spanish with equal fluency. At 5, she knew how to sew simple stitches, and at 7, she could ride alone on the safe paths around the village. But it was her ability to build bridges between different worlds that truly set her apart. When white traders came to the village, Daheste served as interpreter not just of words, but of hearts. When there were conflicts between families, she had a mysterious way of finding solutions that satisfied everyone. "She's like you," Ulzana said to Zije one afternoon, watching their daughter teach younger children to braid wildflowers. "She builds bridges where others see only chasms." Zije smiled, feeling her heart overflow with pride and love. "She's better than me. She was born knowing who she is." It was true. Daheste never had the identity conflicts that had tormented Zije. She knew herself to be simultaneously Apache and daughter of 2 worlds, and this duality wasn't a source of confusion, but of strength. When Daheste turned 10, Zije began teaching her the family stories, about the grandmother who had loved an Apache warrior, about grandfather Jew who had died, protecting his people, about the mother who had left one name to find another. "One day," said Zije, "you'll tell these stories to your children, and they'll tell them to theirs. That's how people never truly die. They live in the stories they leave behind." "And what's the moral of our story, Mama?" Zije thought for a long moment, observing the mountains that had welcomed her when the whole world rejected her. "That sometimes we need to lose ourselves to find ourselves. That true love isn't what chooses us for our beauty, but what sees beauty where others can't. And that home isn't where we're born, but where we choose to flourish." That night, embraced by her husband and hearing their daughter sleep in the next room, Zije knew her story wasn't about a woman who had been rejected and abandoned, but about a soul that had found its way home through the deepest darkness. 15 years had passed since Zije left San Rafael as Visitación Cisneros, but life has mysterious ways of making past and present meet when we least expect it. The news arrived on a summer morning through the whispered words of a merchant coming from the lowlands. There was pestilence in San Rafael, a strange disease that made people languish like plants without water. and that local healers couldn't cure. Ziye was at the village market when she heard the conversation, trading pelts that Ulzana had cured for seeds for her garden. The Fuhu. Merchant's words made her completely forget the transaction. "How many people died?" she asked, approaching the man. "Many. And more are getting sick every day." He looked at her with curiosity. "Does the lady know San Rafael?" "I knew it. Once, long ago." That night, Ziye couldn't sleep. She walked on the terrace of her stone house, looking in the direction where she knew San Rafael lay, though she couldn't see it in the darkness. She thought of Crescencia, who had been like a mother to her. She thought of Primitiva, who once had shown genuine concern. She even thought of Don Macedonio, the man who had raised her without love but who was still part of her story. "You're thinking of going back?" said Ulzana behind her. It wasn't a question. "I know of medicinal plants that could help. I learned from the village healers." "And if they don't receive you well?" Ziye turned to look at him. "I'm not going as Visitacion Cisneros, rejected daughter. I'm going as Ziye, Apache healer. If they reject me, I'll leave, but if there's something I can do to save lives—" Ulzana approached and wrapped her in his arms. "Then we'll go together." "No. This is a journey I need to make alone." "But—" she hesitated. "Daheste could come with me. It's time she knew where I come from." Daheste, now 15, was a young woman of serene beauty, who combined the best of two worlds. When Ziye told her about the trip, her eyes shone with curiosity. "I want to know the place where you were born, Mama, and I want to help heal the sick." They left 2 days later, carrying Apache medicines and the knowledge Ziye had acquired. Over the years, the journey to San Rafael took 3 days, and with each kilometer, Ziye felt old memories stirring like sediment at the bottom of a lake. When they finally spotted the town, Ziye was shocked by what she saw. The streets were almost deserted. Many houses had windows boarded up, and there was an atmosphere of death hovering over everything like heavy fog. They went directly to the local healer's house, where they found a desperate man trying to care for a line of sick people that extended down the street. "Who are you?" he asked, looking suspiciously at their Apache clothing. "I'm Ziye, healer. From the mountains. This is my daughter Daheste. We came to offer help." The man studied them for a moment, then his need overcame his distrust. "Any help is welcome. We've already lost more than 50 people." During the days that followed, Ziye and Daheste worked tirelessly. They prepared herbal teas that reduced fever, applied poultices that relieved pain, taught breathing techniques that strengthened weakened lungs. Slowly, people began to improve. Word spread through the town. The Apache healers were saving lives. It was on the 5th day that Ziye encountered a familiar figure in the line of sick people. Primitiva, now 30 years old, was carrying a small child in her arms. She looked tired and worried, but still maintained traces of the beauty that had made her the most admired girl in San Rafael. When their eyes met, Primitiva froze. "Visitacion?" she whispered, incredulous. "My name is Ziye now," she replied gently. "But yes, it's me." Primitiva began to cry, not tears of joy but of remorse. We treated you so badly, and now you've come back to save us." Ziye gently touched her sister's arm. "I didn't come back out of obligation. I came back because it was the right thing to do." While examining the child in Primitiva's arms, her 2-year-old nephew, Ziye told her sister about her life in the mountains, about Ulzana, about Daheste. "You seem happy," said Primitiva. "Happier than I ever saw you." "I am happy. I found my place in the world. And I married Venancio Montoya. I have 3 children. But sometimes when I look at myself in the mirror, I remember how cruel I was to you, and I'm ashamed." Ziye finished examining the child and prepared a special remedy for him. "The past is past, Primitiva. What matters is who we choose to be now." That night, alone in her lodging, Ziye reflected on how strange it was to be back in the place where she was born. She felt no anger or bitterness, just a kind of quiet peace, as if she were visiting the house of a distant friend. On the last day before leaving, Don Macedonio appeared at the lodging door. He was old, bent by the weight of years and guilt, and when he saw Zille, his words were simple and direct. "Thank you for saving my people, and forgive me for never being the father you deserved." She accepted both with the same serene grace with which she had accepted everything else in her new life. The encounter with Don Macedonio happened on the lodging terrace when the setting sun painted San Rafael with melancholic gold. Zille was preparing the last medicines to leave with the local healer when she heard hesitant steps on the wooden stairs. When she turned, she saw a man who was a shadow of the powerful landowner she had known. Don Macedonio, at 65, had completely white hair and carried a cane to support the weight of tired knees. But it was his eyes that impacted her most. In them was something she had never seen before: humility. "Visitación," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Zille," she corrected gently. "That's my name now." He nodded, as if understanding. He had lost the right to call her by the name he had rejected for 19 years. "Zille, then." He struggled with the words, like a man unaccustomed to asking forgiveness. "I came to thank you, and to ask for forgiveness." Daheste was beside her mother, watching everything with the attentive eyes of one witnessing a historic moment. Zille gently touched her daughter's shoulder, indicating she should stay. "This is my daughter, Daheste," she said. "Daheste, this is Don Macedonio Cisneros." The young woman inclined her head respectfully but didn't bow. There was dignity in her posture that came from the certainty of being unconditionally loved. "She's beautiful," said Don Macedonio, and there was genuine admiration in his voice. "She has your eyes." "And her father's heart," added Zille. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the children of San Rafael play in the street below. Many of them owed their lives to Zille and Daheste's care. "Why did you come back?" Don Macedonio finally asked. "After everything—" "Because it was the right thing to do, and because I'm finally strong enough to return by choice, not obligation." "Strong." He repeated the word as if it was strange in his mouth. "You always were strong. I was too weak to see it." Zille turned to look at him completely. "Don Macedonio—" "No." He raised his hand, interrupting her. "Let me speak. For 15 years, I've carried the weight of what I did. I delivered you as if you were a thing, not a person. I treated you as a burden when you should have been my pride." The words he spoke were ones she had waited for all her life, but now, when they finally came, Zille discovered she no longer needed them. She had found her validation elsewhere, in Ulzana's love, in the Apache village's respect, in the daughter she had raised with security and love. "Primitiva told me about your life," he continued. "About your husband, your house in the mountains, how you're respected among your people. And she told me something else." He paused, swallowing hard. "That you seem happy, truly happy. In a way you never seemed here." "I am happy," she confirmed. "I've found where I belong." "And here was never that place, was it?" The question carried so much weight that Zille felt compassion for the man who had made her. She saw now that Don Macedonio wasn't a monster, just a man limited by the prejudices of his time, incapable of loving what he didn't understand. "No," she said gently, "but I needed to pass through here to get there. Can you forgive me?" Zille looked toward the distant mountains where she knew Ulzana was waiting for her, then toward Daheste, who watched everything with the wisdom of one born loved. "I forgave long ago, Don Macedonio, not for you but for me. Forgiveness freed me to be happy." He cried then, silent tears of a man who had carried guilt for 15 years and could finally let it go. May I hug you?" "Once." Zille approached and allowed him to embrace her with the delicacy of one touching something precious they almost lost forever. It was a goodbye, embrace of reconciliation, of peace finally found. When they separated, Don Macedonio turned to Daheste. "Take good care of your mother, child. She's more precious than I knew how to value." "She takes very good care of herself," replied Daheste with a smile, "but we love her anyway." The next morning, Zille and Daheste left San Rafael for the last time. Primitiva came to say goodbye, bringing a small doll that had belonged to Ziye as a child. So you remember that once you had sisters who loved you, even if they didn't. Know how to show it, she said. During the return journey, Daheste asked many questions about her mother's life before the mountains. Do you miss anything from that life? She asked during a rest stop. Ziye thought carefully before answering. I miss my mother's sewing machine. I miss the stories Crescencia told. But I don't miss being Visitacion. Why? Because Visitacion was a daughter of fear and rejection. Ziye is a daughter of love and choice. When they finally spotted the red mountains of their true home, Ziye knew the circle had been completed. She was no longer the rejected child who had left seeking acceptance, but the woman who had found her inner strength and could now offer it to the world. 20 years had passed since Ziye left San Rafael for the second time, and now, at 54, she was one of the most respected healers in the entire region. Her stone house had become a place of pilgrimage for women seeking advice, healing, and wisdom. Daheste, now 35, had married a young Apache warrior named Chihuahua and given him 3 beautiful children, who filled the mountains with their laughter. She had become the living bridge between worlds that Nietzsche had prophesied she would be, serving as interpreter, not just of languages, but of cultures. Ulzana, at 63, had become a respected elder, consultant on matters of war and peace. His hair was completely white now, but his eyes maintained the same intensity that had captivated Ziye the first time they met. It was on an autumn afternoon, when leaves danced golden in the wind, that an unexpected visitor arrived at the village who would change everything. Ziye was in her herb garden when Daheste came running, her face full of emotion she couldn't disguise. Mama, you need to come. There's a woman who says she knows you from long ago. Intrigued, Ziye followed her daughter to the village's central plaza, where a small crowd had gathered around a travel cart. When she saw who was getting down from it, her heart stopped for a moment. Crescencia, the governess who had been her only friend in San Rafael, was there, older with graying hair and age lines around her eyes, but unmistakably the same woman who had told her stories and dried her tears as a child. Child? Said Crescencia, her voice breaking with emotion. My child. They embraced there in the middle of the plaza, 2 women who hadn't seen each other for decades, but whose hearts recognized each other immediately. Ziye cried for the first time in years, tears of joy mixed with nostalgia for a time that seemed to have existed in another life. How did you find me? Asked Ziye when they finally separated. I followed stories. Stories about an Apache healer who saved San Rafael from pestilence, who had familiar eyes and a generous heart. Crescencia gently touched Ziye's face. I knew it could only be you. That night, sitting on the terrace of the stone house with Ulzana and Daheste, Crescencia told the news from San Rafael. Don Macedonio had died 5 years earlier, leaving the lands to Primitiva and her husband. Exaltacion had married a rich merchant and moved to the city. Life had continued its course, as it always does. But I came here for another reason, said Crescencia, taking a small suitcase she had brought with her. I came to bring something that was always yours. She opened the suitcase and took out something that made Ziye's heart leap, her mother's sewing machine, carefully disassembled and wrapped in soft fabrics. When Don Macedonio died, he left specific instructions. He said this machine should go to you, along with a letter he wrote shortly before dying. With trembling hands, Ziye opened the sealed envelope. Don Macedonio's handwriting was shaky, clearly written by sick hands, but the words were firm. To Ziye, who was once Visitacion and always was my daughter in heart, though I didn't know how to show it. This machine belonged to your true mother, who made me promise on her deathbed that I would care for you as if you were my own daughter. I failed in that promise in many ways, but I hope you'll accept this inheritance as a plea for forgiveness and a sign of late but sincere love. There was more in the letter, words about regret and pride, about how he had followed her life through stories that reached him, about how proud he felt of the woman she had become. But it was the last lines that truly touched her heart. You found your place in the world despite me, not because of me. That speaks to the strength of your character and the love you always deserved. May this machine continue creating beauty, In your hands, as your mother always wanted it to. That night, after Crescencia settled in the guest room and the family retired to sleep, Zije and Ulzana remained alone on the terrace, contemplating the stars that shone like diamonds in the infinite sky. "Are you going to assemble the machine?" asked Ulzana. "Yes, but not to return to the past. To honor my mother's memory and continue creating for the future." "And Crescencia?" "I invited her to stay. She has no more family in San Rafael, and here she can be the grandmother my grandchildren deserve." Ulzana smiled and drew her closer to him. "Do you know what this means, don't you?" "What?" "That your story completed a perfect circle. The child who left rejected became the woman who welcomes others. The seamstress who worked alone now has her mother's machine to teach future generations." Zije rested her head on her husband's shoulder and felt a deep peace settle in her heart. "Do you know what's most incredible, Ulzana? Tell me. All these years I thought my story was about finding love and acceptance, but now I see it was always about something greater. What was it? It was about learning that our true strength doesn't come from being loved by others, but from our capacity to love despite everything. It was about discovering that home isn't a place, but a state of mind. It was about understanding that sometimes we need to lose ourselves completely to truly find ourselves." Ulzana gently kissed the top of her head and whispered, "And now that you understand all that?" Zije smiled in the soft darkness and replied, "Now we teach our daughters and granddaughters that they're already born complete, that their beauty lies in their inner strength, and that they never need to choose between who they are and where they belong." 10 more years passed, and Zije, now grandmother to 6 beautiful grandchildren, had become a living legend among her people. Her stone house had expanded to include a school where she taught sewing, healing, and life wisdom to girls from across the region. Her mother's sewing machine occupied a place of honor in the main room, still working perfectly after so many decades. Crescencia, who had lived her last years surrounded by affection and purpose, had departed peacefully the previous winter, leaving a void that was also a blessing. The void left when someone completes their mission on earth with dignity. It was on a golden spring afternoon that Daheste came to her mother's house bringing her youngest daughter, Ayana, barely 5 years old. The child had been found crying in the garden after other children made fun of her freckles and curly hair that refused to be tamed. "Grandmother Zije," said the little girl with tears in her dark eyes, "why am I different from the other girls?" Zije knelt before her granddaughter and gently dried her tears. "Come with me, little flower, I'm going to tell you a story." She took Ayana by the hand to the terrace facing west, where they sat on the wooden bench Ulzana had built especially for moments like this. Daheste followed them, knowing she was about to witness the transmission of wisdom that passed from generation to generation. "Once upon a time," began Zije with a voice sweet as honey, "there was a girl named Visitacion. She had black hair like night and brown skin like earth after rain, and she thought that made her different from all the others." Ayana snuggled in her grandmother's lap, her big eyes fixed on the wise face telling the story. This girl lived in a house where everyone had golden hair and clear eyes, and for a long time she thought her difference was something bad. She thought if she were like the others, she would be more loved. "And was she?" asked Ayana. "No, little one, because her difference wasn't a defect, it was a gift. It was her special beauty, which just needed to find the right people to be seen and loved." Zia told the story of her life as if it were a fairy tale. The delivery to the Apache warrior, the journey through the mountains, the love that grew slowly like a well-tended plant, the discovery of her true identity, the new name that came with new life. "And what happened to Visitacion?" asked Ayana, completely absorbed. She discovered she wasn't Visitacion, she was Zije, she who shines. And her light didn't come from being like the others, but from being exactly who she was, unique, special, perfect as she was born. Like me. Exactly like you, my stone flower. That's what Zije called her grandchildren. Stone flowers. Because they were beautiful and delicate, but also strong enough to grow in any terrain. That night, after Daheste took Ayana home, Zije sat before her sewing machine and worked on a special dress. It was small, made for a 5-year-old girl, in green fabric like new leaves, with delicate embroidery that told the story of a flower that learned to shine. When she finished, she held the dress against the candlelight and smiled. Each stitch was a prayer, each embroidery a lesson in love. It was a gift for Ayana, but also a symbol of everything she had learned about accepting and celebrating differences. Ulzana found her like this, sewing in the golden light, and for a moment he was transported back to that first night in the tent, when he had seen her work with the same loving concentration. "What are you doing, my flower who shines?" That's how he still called her even after 45 years together. "I'm embroidering the future," she replied. "Each stitch is a hope that our granddaughters grow up knowing they're loved exactly as they are. And our story? How do you want it to be remembered?" Ziye paused in her sewing and looked at the man who had chosen to love her when no one else did. "I want it to be remembered as the story of two people who found each other when they most needed to, who built true love on a foundation of respect and patience, and who proved that sometimes the most precious gifts come wrapped in ways we don't immediately recognize. And the lesson: that true beauty isn't in what others see when they look at us, but in what we choose to see when we look at ourselves. That true love isn't what completes us, but what allows us to be complete being, exactly who we are." Ulzana approached and gently kissed the top of her head, now adorned with silver threads that shone like silver in the candlelight. "And that home," he added, "is where our heart learns to sing." The next morning Ziya gave the embroidered dress to Ayana and saw the child's eyes light up like stars in the dark sky. "Is it for me, grandmother?" "It's for you, my stone flower, so you always remember that your special beauty is a gift from the Creator." Ayana hugged the dress against her chest and then hugged her grandmother with the strength of one who had just received much more than new clothes. "Grandmother Ziye, when I grow up, will I be like you?" "No, little one. You're going to be better than me. You're going to be exactly as Ayana should be." That afternoon, while watching her granddaughter play in the garden wearing her new outfit, Ziye felt the cycle complete in a way she had never imagined. The rejected child she had once been had become the grandmother who taught other girls to love themselves. Daheste approached, carrying her youngest son in her lap. "Mama, I need to tell you something." "What is it, my daughter?" "The village council chose me to be the new keeper of traditions. They want me to document our history, to record the lessons you've taught all these years." Ziye smiled, feeling deep pride expand in her chest like a flower opening to the E. "Son, and are you going to accept?" "Yes, but I want to start with your story, with the story of how Visitación became Ziye." "Why?" "Because it's the most important story I know. It's about transformation, about finding strength in difference, about love that heals all wounds." Daheste paused. "It's about how a woman can change the world simply by refusing to accept that she doesn't deserve love." That night, 3 generations of women sat around the fire in the patio of the stone house. Ziye, Daheste, and Ayana, each representing a stage of life's journey, each carrying the wisdom of their generation. "Tell again, grandmother," asked Ayana. "Tell about when you found your true name." And Ziya told once more the story that had become legend. But this time, as she spoke, she realized she wasn't just remembering the past, she was planting seeds for the future. "Do you know what's the most important part of the story?" she asked at the end. "What?" Ayana and her mother asked in, unison. "That you'll never need to go through what I went through, because you already know from little that you're loved, that you're valuable, that your difference is a gift, not a burden." "And if we forget?" asked Ayana. "Then look toward the mountains," said Ziye, pointing to the peaks outlined against the starry sky. "They taught me that sometimes we need to climb very high to see how truly beautiful we are. And remember, you are daughters of earth and fire, strong from within and bright by nature." Years later, when Ziye became a respected elder with hair white as mountain snow, she continued receiving visits from women who came seeking advice. Some were young, trying to discover their place in the world. Others were mothers worried about, daughters who felt different. Still others were wives seeking strength to follow their own paths. To all she offered the same wisdom. That true beauty comes from within. That true love chooses to accept rather than try to change. And that home is where our heart learns to sing. On an autumn afternoon, when she was 70 and her grandchildren were already adults with children of their own, Ziye sat on her favorite terrace, sewing a final project, a rug that told in embroidery the story of her life. Each square represented an important moment: the rejection in San Rafael, the journey through the mountains, the first meeting with Ulzana, the naming ceremony, Daheste's birth, the years of happiness. Ulzana, now 83 and moving more, slowly but still with the same penetrating eyes that had captivated her decades before, approached her. "What are you embroidering now, my eternal flower who shines?" "The last square," she replied, showing a delicate embroidery of two figures holding hands under a starry sky. "Our love story." "And what will be the legend?" Ziye thought for a moment. The needle paused over the fabric. Two souls who found each other when they most needed to, built a life on a foundation of respect and true love, and proved that the most beautiful miracles happen when we learn to see with the eyes of the heart. That night, while they slept side by side as they had done for 45 years, Ziye dreamed of the child she had once been, Visitacion, silent and rejected, sewing alone in her small room. In the dream, she approached that child and whispered, "Don't be afraid, little one. I know now it seems like no one sees you, that no one loves you, that you're a burden to the world. But I came from the future to tell you a secret. You're the seed of something beautiful that's yet to bloom. All the pain you're feeling now is creating the strength you'll need to help other people find themselves. Your rejection is preparing you to welcome. Your loneliness is teaching you how to heal broken hearts." When she woke the next morning, Ziye knew her mission was complete. She had transformed her pain into wisdom, her rejection into acceptance, her difference into a gift for the world. 5 years later, when her great-granddaughter was born with a birthmark on her face that some considered a defect, it was Ziye who held the baby in her arms and whispered, "Welcome, little stone flower. You're perfect exactly as you are, and I'm going to make sure you grow up knowing that." And so the story of Visitacion, who became Ziye, continued through the generations, not as a tale of suffering, but as a hymn of triumph. A reminder that sometimes the most precious gifts come wrapped in ways we don't immediately recognize, that true love isn't what completes us, but what allows us to be complete, being exactly who we are, and that our true beauty isn't in what others see when they look at us, but in what we choose to see when we look at ourselves. When Ziye departed this life at 85 on a peaceful spring morning, she was found on her terrace with a serene smile on her lips and a final sewing in her hands, a small handkerchief embroidered with a single word in Apache, Shieji, my daughter, a final gift for every woman who would come after her, reminding them that they were all her spiritual daughters, all worthy of love, all flowers that could bloom even in the hardest stone. Her headstone, carved from red stone of the mountains she had loved so much, bears a simple inscription that summarizes her entire journey. Ziye, she who shines. She taught us that true strength is born when we choose to love despite everything. That home is where our heart learns to sing, and that sometimes we need to lose ourselves completely to truly find ourselves. And so the daughter of earth and fire left as her legacy not just a life well lived, but the eternal certainty that every rejected soul carries within itself the seed of something extraordinary, waiting only for the right hands to plant it in the soil of true love.